It's my pleasure to introduce my guest today, pianist, composer, educator, and researcher, Philipp Teriete. Today we will explore the tradition of improvisation and the link with Partimento in the 19th century and the education of the great pianist-composers of that century, Chopin, and so much more. Philipp, welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me, Nikhil. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Could you give me a brief introduction to yourself and how you came to focus on your areas of research?
Sure. Yeah. So I started out on piano and guitar, growing up in an area near Münster in Westphalia.
You're a guitarist too.
Also, I was trained on the guitar for quite some time. That was before my professional studies, but I was actually in between, piano and guitar. I wasn't sure what to do.
Wow. So classical guitar?
Classical guitar, a little bit of electric guitar.
Nice. Great.
Like my two all-time heroes back in the days when I was like 12 years old or so, were Arthur Rubinstein and Jimi Hendrix.
Good combination.
Yeah. And so I was, always in between these two worlds. And so growing up in Münster, near Münster, which is between Cologne and Hamburg, roughly close to the Dutch border, I had pretty good, good teachers when I was 16, 17, that also helped me to make this decision to become a professional musician. But I wasn't really into music theory at that time. I was just playing, like probably most people are doing it. And then I was fortunate that my teacher back in the days, Gregor Weichert, with whom I studied like in a kind of pre-college situation, he recommended to maybe check out Freiburg, as a university to go to study. And Weichert was a student of Konrad Hansen and Alfred Cortot, and he taught me quite some bits on the piano. And so I was fortunate and to get into the program in Freiburg, where I met my teacher Tibor Sass.
Oh wow!
And,
okay.
Yeah, Tibor became my piano professor for a long time for my classical degrees. So my bachelor's and master's I did in Freiburg on the piano, and I also met Ludwig Holtmeier, who became my mentor and the great teacher. For, I think 7-8 years I studied with Ludwig, intense studies in Freiburg, and I did a double degree. So I did a double degree program, and as it turned out, I was fascinated by the research Ludwig was conducting, the research about Partimento and how people were trained in the 17th, 18th century. And what I did immediately was I delved into the Partimento tradition in the 19th century. So that was in 2006. I started my studies of piano in Freiburg. And right after that, I got into the degree program also in music theory. And not only did we do what we call Satzlehre, Satztechnik, which is basically pastiche writing, and improvisation, Partimento, thoroughbass playing, but I researched that. And I researched about the pianist-composers of the 19th century, and a lot about the Paris Conservatory and how people were trained, professional pianists. And what struck me was that the education was so different. It was so different from what I had gotten to know and from how pianists still today are being trained, that since then I cannot stop researching about it and diving into it deeper and deeper. And yeah, that's how I got into research, really. I was a practical musician and still am, but my passion for the research that came in that time, 2006-07, I would say.
So let's begin with the 19th century, and I've had a few guests on, and it's been very interesting. We've talked a little bit about the 19th century. So let's begin with a little-known pedagogue and teacher by the name of Pierre-Joseph-Guillaume Zimmermann. And a lot of piano teachers are familiar with Czerny, Clementi, Kramer, Hannon, but that name is not too familiar to a lot of people. Can you give a brief introduction to him?
Sure. Yeah, so Pierre-Joseph-Guillaume Zimmermann, he was the head of the Paris Conservatory piano department for a long time. In my opinion, I don't like these comparisons, where you call someone the French Czerny or something, or the American Mozart or whatever. But Zimmermann really was the most important, in my opinion, the most important pedagogue on the piano in the first half of the 19th century in Paris, which, as everybody knows, was the musical center. I mean, that was the capital of the European capital of music, I would say. And
why do you say that? Did he have any famous students?
Oh, he had a lot of famous students. I mean, not just Charles Valentin Alkan, but Georges Bizet, César Franck, Charles Gounod.
Wow.
He was the father-in-law of Charles Gounod. And he had the most, very importantly, he had one of the most famous and most professional salons in Paris, where all the famous pianists would gather and, meet, and Rossini was there, and the artists that lived at the Square d'Orléans in that time, which I actually, when I studied in Paris, I went there to check it out, because he was the direct neighbor of Chopin.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, they were living next door, literally.
No kidding.
Yeah. And also Friedrich Kalkbrenner was there, and there's an interesting quote that I also have in my articles about Zimmermann, is that they could, with open windows, everybody could hear each other practicing, so Zimmermann could literally hear Chopin or teaching. And nowadays it's all, law offices, and it's a very, very nice building, pretty building. But they were direct neighbors, Chopin and Zimmermann. They knew each other pretty well. And Alkan was probably one of the best friends of Chopin in that time, and he was a Zimmermann student. So
can I jump in, Philip? Can you talk about Zimmermann's training?
Yeah. So Zimmermann was trained like, a lot of these students in that time of his generation, like also Czerny, in music theory, composition, and on the piano at the same time. So he was a real pianist-composer, what they call pianist-compositeur in French. And some were compositeur-pianiste. There was a fine differentiation between the two, meaning that you would be primarily a pianist-composer if you were a pianist, and then you would also compose. Or you were a composer, but also pretty good on the piano if you were a compositeur-pianiste. And so he was trained by Cherubini in music theory and composition and counterpoint, and Boieldieu, and he was, in the Paris Conservatory tradition of counterpoint, harmonie, and he also almost became professor of counterpoint, following Ehler. But then he wanted to stay, with the pianists, and he decided not to accept the position as a professor of counterpoint at the Paris Conservatory, but to keep on educating the génération de 1830, the generation of 1830, which was literally the golden generation of piano virtuosos at the Paris Conservatory, and that's what he did. Yeah. He's a central figure. He fell into oblivion shortly after his death, like so many great pedagogues, which is, that's the fate.
A victim of the cult of the genius, right?
Absolutely, of the cult of genius. And there's a very nice, text by his successor and famous student, Marmontel. By the way, Marmontel was the teacher of Debussy, and so you can really trace.
Gosh,
yeah, it's not just anyone, and all the French, like the whole French school. In my opinion, the whole French school of piano playing is founded not just on Louis Adam, who came before Zimmermann, but it's really Zimmermann who took it to the next level, in my opinion, of virtuosity and that training. That was the Paris Conservatory's training. And he wrote this famous treatise his chef d'œuvre, the Encyclopédie du pianiste-compositeur. And it really is an encyclopedia of the pianist-composer. And when I found this treatise, that was in 2007, it changed my life. I can really say it changed my life, because I found everything I was always wondering about, why and how did they learn it? How did
Philip,
they learn
Sure. Okay, so is Zimmermann, before you really did your research on him, was he basically in oblivion at that point?
He was, yeah, absolutely.
So really no one's talking about Zimmermann until you started really rediscovering him? I mean, is anyone using his treatise today or in any way?
I actually, certainly there must be people out there. I'm sure there are some people who know about him, but the first time I came across Zimmermann's name was in a publication by Renate Groth, a German musicologist who researched about the Paris Conservatory and the traditions there. But it was literally just that I read the title of that book, and it raised my curiosity. I was like, that sounds interesting. Pianist composer, and there's an encyclopedia. So I went to Cologne, where there was one treatise left there, of the very few that we have in German archives. And I went there and I got the volume 1 and 2. And it was tantalizing, because volume 3 was all that I was caring about, because volume 1 and 2 is the big piano school and all the scales and arpeggios and pieces for beginners and all that stuff. But number 3 was really the one I wanted to get into. And so I was there, and it was dedicated by hand by Zimmermann to his friend Ferdinand Hiller, another very interesting figure of the time, one of the first directors of the Cologne Conservatory, by the way, and good friend of Mendelssohn and Chopin and Liszt. And so, the handwritten dedication, but that was all there was. So I ordered from the Harvard, from Loeb Library, I ordered a microfilm. And so it arrived, and I was, going to the library and checking it out. And literally, I started to cry. I really, I couldn't believe it, because there was all I was looking for was in it, like the Partimenti, Fenaroli.
Whoa! Wait, hold on a second. Did you just say the magic word, Partimenti?
He talks about the Fenaroli and says that you have to, in his treatise, there's Fenaroli.
So you're saying the head of the piano department and the Paris Conservatory was mentioning this in his treatise?
Absolutely,
wow.
Absolutely. There's it's now it's online. The whole.
It is okay. I looked at the IMSLP, and I see, and it's actually some kind soul actually did upload it. But you know what? I see 15 downloads, less than 20 down. No one knows this. I hope after this interview, more people check out this incredible find.
And I can just tell it's really worth checking it out, because the third part, which is specifically interesting, it's a treatise of harmony. It's there's a chapter about thoroughbass, about how to do preludes, to improvise a little introduction to pieces, and also other bigger improvisations. And then there's a whole part about counterpoint and fugue, about the free composition, then also score reading. Like that's basically the Parnassum, if you want, of all the studies for the pianist to reduce a full orchestral score.
And you use this term in your article. You use holistic, so it really encompasses more than just piano playing.
Absolutely. It is it's the whole package. It's the whole package. It's from, the earliest training of, fingerings and stuff. But Zimmermann's expertise as a pedagogue is just mind-blowing, because he starts off, even for the young pianists, he has these things, special things where he's thinking ahead so far. For example, you see this chart which is in my article in this book I just published with my good friend and colleague Derek Ramesh about applied piano. Yeah, we just published this collection of articles where we both also contribute an article. It's called The Universal Instrument, Historical and Contemporary Perspectives on Applied Piano. Because there's a huge comeback, at least in Europe right now, of these disciplines, and so I contributed my Zimmermann article in English. I had written it in German before, but there's this chart that I included in the article, which is in the encyclopédie. It's called the Tableau du clavier à 7 octaves, where you can see the piano, but also all the corresponding instruments and the ranges of the instruments. So the young pianists would learn how to already learn the
orchestra,
ranges of
kind of like the
orchestra. Absolutely. And these stories when they say that Liszt, when he played, sounded like an orchestra and some other pianists. And I really think it's because, this kind of pedagogy of teaching students, pianists, how to phrase like the instruments, how to phrase like an oboe or like a clarinet. That makes a big difference. And this, like, even in the first part and the second part, I've not seen any other school like this school, except for maybe some of Czerny's works, like the Practical School of Composition and the great piano school Opus 500. But Zimmermann's is the most concise, in my opinion, most concise, and really, it's just a great insight into what they did at the time at the Paris Conservatory. And that was, of course, a very elitistic, all the elite, but not only the pianists, but also the composers. Whichever other instruments they were playing, they had to learn the piano. Like in jazz, that's so beautiful, because it reminds me of the jazz education in many places.
You're also an expert on Partimento of the 18th century. Can you contrast Zimmermann's curriculum with, say, Fenaroli's? How do you see the difference there?
I think there are still a lot of things that you have in the Italian conservatories that was still you can still find it in the teachings of Zimmermann, but it's more like they have developed it further, and they include other disciplines, like I just said, the score reading, etc. I've never seen it in treatises put out there, because probably it was taught in the classroom, but it not explicitly in one method. And the Paris Conservatory, that's what's great about it, is that the teachers, the professors, they had to also publish their methods, and so Zimmermann really tried to lay out this whole of his 30 years of experience at that time he had as a teacher. He put it all in there, and it's just like, it's the foreword already is, you can see it, and he's just great.
Let's take a few examples then. So there's a couple of things I was really interested in from the article. You mentioned he recommended solfège, the solfèges of his teacher Cherubini for a practical examination and application. So I'm assuming this is fixed though, right? Because that was common from 1750 onwards, and Cherubini probably just dove into that. But that's great to sing, right? I mean, to sing is wonderful.
Absolutely.
And so can you just talk a little bit about the solfège and how it's important for the learning in his curriculum?
Yeah, I really think it's an integral part, for the ear training aspect, and how to also for the improvisation, so people can catch a melody by ear and just play what they hear. And it's as I understand it, yes, it's fixed do, and the children that came to Zimmermann, but also other pedagogues like Kalkbrenner or Camille Stamati. They had to learn solfège, and it was a very complete training in not just solfeggio, but then you have this smooth transition into thoroughbass playing and composing.
Okay. Then we jump. Yeah. You mentioned that they have to learn 7 clefs right from the beginning. This is very much like the Neapolitans, right? So 7 clefs, and that's in the treatise.
That's in the treatise, and the 7 clefs, and I did that myself for quite a while. It's not easy at the beginning. You have to really grow up with the 7 clefs to be able to transpose any piece you want with the 7 clefs. And when studying in Paris, so my dream back in the days was to study at the Paris Conservatory and to check out what are they still doing there of all the stuff that I researched. And in the accompagnement classes, they still do it, by side transposing stuff on the piano pieces. And you really need the 7 clefs. Daniel Barenboim, by the way, he also describes it in his biography that he had to transpose all the whole well-tempered clavier.
Wow.
And with the clefs, it's just more a sort of it's a mechanical way of transposing.
How long would that take to learn something like that?
It takes many years to be really fluent at it. It takes years because you need to be as fluent in the baritone clef as you have to be in the bass or in the treble clef. It's, but also then if you look at what I studied at the Paris Conservatory was Renaissance counterpoint with a great teacher, one of the best I know in this kind of field is Olivier Trachier. And, we had to write motets in hohe Chiavette, high Chiavette, I think it's called in English, but so baritone clef, mezzo-soprano clef, all those clefs that you normally in modern scores, and you don't have to know how to read them. But it's really helpful for the transposing. And Zimmermann lays it out. There were even treatises just on how to transpose with the clefs.
There is quite a trenchant comment that Zimmermann puts in there. He said, in our days, the virtuoso who can only play the piano, however skilled he may be, can only be considered as a schoolboy. Wow. If he does not add to this practical talent the knowledge of harmony. So that's pretty harsh. So, but that's in there. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Ouch.
Yeah. That's devastating. Ouch. You can imagine when I read that, being trained in, playing mostly repertoire, and, it's hard enough. That's already something. But, it's a whole different approach. I think it's really like and there it comes to Liszt and how Liszt, you can see what Liszt taught. Valérie Boissier, the Auguste Boissier documented of the daughter of Boissier had lessons with Liszt, and we have nice documentation of how Liszt, when he was a younger pianist, how he taught, and he recommends even Zimmermann's scales. He wrote about the Paris Conservatory and how great the faculty was, even though he didn't get in because Cherubini had to stick to
Cherubini.
that.
He gave Liszt a hard time. I guess he gave Berlioz a hard time chasing him around a room or something.
Yeah, but I think it's a little like in Amadeus, like the movie, and I think it was less spectacular. It's more like an anecdote, I guess. But Liszt, I don't think Cherubini didn't want to accept Liszt into the Paris Conservatory. It was just like some politics, like those issues. Like Gottschalk, also Zimmermann.
You have to mention that story.
I'm sorry to mention it, but it's the typical, the spectacular things. That's what Gottschalk and Zimmermann are remembered for. Zimmermann is mostly remembered for his not accepting Gottschalk into the Paris Conservatory. And Louis Moreau Gottschalk, the famous, one of the greatest U.S. American piano virtuosos of the time. But I think it was also less spectacular than Gottschalk was pretty bitter about it, but in the end, they were together also in the juries of the,
Didn't he say something like America is just a country of like steam engines? Steam engines,
yeah. And Zimmermann, I don't know if I would have gotten along with him or not, but I just look at his, at his legacy as a pedagogue. And you have to say, the Paris Conservatory, they were well aware of their superiority at the time and very arrogant in many ways. But they were just, I have to say it, they were just great pedagogues too. Yeah.
So you mentioned Partimento. So did they have things like the rule of the octave? And I guess the marches are sequences, right? They're moti del basso, basically.
Yeah, so you always have, like you find in Fenaroli and also the oldest Partimenti that we have, you always find cadences, you find progressions, and you find the rule of the octave. So that's exactly what Zimmermann also teaches.
Are they like 19th century embellished kind of versions, like examples as well?
You can trace it a little bit. You can see that it's 19th century rule of the octaves. I would really deliberately use the plural because there are different versions of it, and it's pretty similar to the one that also Kalkbrenner uses in his traité du pianiste, traité d'harmonie Pour le pianiste, that's basically the treatise of harmony for the pianist, is a very slim version of this third part of Zimmermann, I would say, where they were teaching the rule of the octave in different positions, in major, minor, and you can always see it with some chords that are distinctly different. Like, for instance, the second scale degree that carries the sixth chord in the oldest rules of the octave, but then in the more modern version is with a second inversion, if you would say second inversion, but I would say yeah.
Oh, we're in trouble here.
I'm now saying second inversion, a dominant chord on the second scale degree. I would say terz quarter chord, third, the chord of the third and fourth, and there are some chords and some harmonic progressions where you can see, okay, this is mid 19th century now, and it's evolving, still evolving, and you can also see it in the orchestral instruments. You can see this chart that he included for the young pianist. It has also the range of the modern orchestra, and it's moving on. It's not like they are stuck in the 18th century or so, but you can really see it in the harmonic progressions too.
Furno has those dispositions later on when studying with him. Is there something like that as well? Would Zimmermann have because I notice he's leading all the way into orchestral writing. Does he have, because he wanted to he was considering teaching counterpoint, so does he also lead to that as well? In his counterpoint section and fugue section. So the counterpoint section is mostly about fugues, because it's really for the pianist, and he also says, okay, now we've at the end of the part of the treatise of harmony, he says, okay, now we've dealt with all the things necessary for the professional pianist to know, and for all the pianists that want to know more about the art of the fugue, etc. Now we're diving into that one. So he's really focusing on the pianistic aspect of improvising fugues, writing fugues, understanding fugues, and not getting too much into the details of free composition and how to deal with a big orchestral score, etc. It's more like score reading. So it's very practical. It's for the pianist. But he's always referencing, he's always saying, okay, you can find more about this. Check out that book. Yeah, great.
Exactly. The footnotes are just fantastic. Zimmermann's footnotes. By the way, I just forgot to mention before, there is one scholar that actually roughly around the same time when I discovered these things about Zimmermann, started also to research about him, and is Yasushi Ueda. Is a Japanese musicologist who studied at the Sorbonne. And just recently I found out about him because I was contacted by a Greek pianist and scholar who asked me about Zimmermann and my research, and he put me in touch with Yasushi, and he's done great work really about Zimmermann and finding out about the family connections, etc. Not so much dealing with the music theoretical aspects, but I just wanted to mention that because it just came to my attention. So, as always, in research, there are more people than just I just didn't see anything else, written about Zimmermann at the time. It was 2006-07. There was really nothing published, and also Yasushi, he just recently published his research about Zimmermann, and now I think there might be a little comeback of these things. But
I hope so. Yeah, you guys are doing fantastic work.
Hope so, yeah.
And look at the IMSLP. It is 10 downloads, 15 downloads. Let's get it to 10,000. I mean, more people.
Yeah.
Can I ask if people know Hanon, they know the virtuoso pianist.
Yeah.
Does the Zimmermann book approach that in any way in terms of its technical teaching?
Also, but Hanon is also an interesting figure. Hanon, the things that are published by Hanon are the scales and the how to put your fingers. But Hanon also published a lot of other things, like how to accompany plain chants as an organist, and this kind of stuff. And Czerny is the same in that regard. Who I think what we need are modern editions of these. So I'm working on a modern edition of Zimmermann's and a translation.
Oh, when is that coming out?
Oh, I hope I can finish soon. I just it's just too many things I'm researching, like also my PhD stuff that I'm getting into. It's just the Zimmermann method. So what I think the problem is that those interesting pedagogical works that Zimmermann published, or also Czerny and Hanon, the publishers nowadays, they don't publish it anymore. So they still have Czerny's Fingerübung and this kind of school of velocity, and this kind of stuff is still being published, and they have new editions, etc. But it's just, that's scales, and that's fine.
So you're saying his actual, like his other more holistic stuff is not being touched on. It's more the technical stuff. Okay. So it's like if Zimmermann were published today, people would only be looking at his first book and kind of ignoring the other more important. Well, not to say more important, but the other books as well. So
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, I'm really looking forward to your book. And let's turn to Chopin now. And this is great. It ties in a lot of things. Everyone's interested in how Chopin learned. I mean, you get such a great composer like Chopin for the piano, and people want to know, how did this guy get so good? And of course, if you were part of the cult of the genius, no questions. He just descended from the heavens. But I'm glad that scholars are taking a look at his background and who he learned with. So let's talk about Chopin. Let's start it off. So, like, who were his first teachers, and how did he get started?
Yeah, so that was basically my first huge article. I mean, the whole thing, like Chopin's education and his unfinished piano method. And so I got into his early teaching and found out about his first teachers, and they also taught. One of them was Václav Wilhelm Würfel, and a part of Joseph Elsner, who's always named as his famous teacher, but Chopin received a very intense training in counterpoint and thoroughbass playing from a very early age on in Warsaw, and I think it was underestimated for a long time, the quality of the education in Warsaw, which was basically also modeled after the Paris Conservatory curriculum.
Okay, now when you say that, what's the evidence for that?
So Joseph Elsner, who was the director of the Warsaw Conservatory back in the days, he traveled to Paris, and that's well documented in Halina Goldberg's publication on music in Chopin's Warsaw. And so he went to Paris, checked out the curriculum, and modeled the Warsaw Conservatory curriculum after the Paris curriculum. And so Chopin was his private student too. So you have to imagine Chopin had like private lessons with the director of the Warsaw Conservatory.
That's cool, yeah.
Yeah, so really one of the best teachers at the time in Poland. And he was trained on the organ, on many different instruments that remind me a little bit of, like modern day synthesizers, and, like he was very curious about the new technology of his day, and he received counterpoint lessons. And in his letters, you can really read a lot.
I know that quote. So that quote, training. He says, "I study 6 hours of counterpoint with Elsner a week." So that's the proof, right? That he.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just that, but I was really furious back in the days. Now I'm not so angry anymore, but I was really furious at Eigeldinger, the famous Chopin scholar, who in the MGG, Musik und Geschichte und Gegenwart, he really, in his article about Chopin, said Chopin was self-taught. He never really had a piano lesson, a professional piano lesson. Because, that's, how can you say that? Because you look at the
I read a quote where they said in the university, leave him alone, he's a genius, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I don't know why he does that. I don't really know why he does it. And I really, I think it's a responsibility of the scholar. And he's sitting on so much amazing material, Eigeldinger, that I respect his scholarship. No, really, don't get me wrong. But it's just something that is so important for our now present day musical education, that I'm just thinking like, hey, if you see that he had thoroughbass training, he was trained on the organ, he was doing, he's playing the cembalo. How can you say he never got a professional piano lesson? Well, maybe not on what we consider modern day Steinway, but
and he did go to conservatory, right? He eventually
absolutely. he had the most, in my opinion, one of the most thoroughly trained musicians of his time. It's like a little bit like Mendelssohn. A lot of parallels. I also researched about Mendelssohn's education, and his lesson was Carl Friedrich Zelter. And there are many parallels where it's really interesting. They were ready when at age 18, he was a readily, completely, trained a pianist and composer. Not just a pianist, but a really very well-trained composer. And so there are very important treatises of the time that were published in Warsaw. And I can just name, for instance, now Kopinski's treatise on also thoroughbass. And Kopinski also included Förster's thoroughbass exercises.
So these are all treatises that Elsner may be using with Chopin.
So Elsner also published a thoroughbass treatise, but not published. There's an unpublished manuscript, but you can see that he taught the rule of the octave too. And that was at that time that was state of the art, the training in thoroughbass. And for any opera composer, that was a requirement. You had to know that. And so
Chopin knew the rule of the octave, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely say he did. I mean, it's always hard to say, okay, if you don't have you have Elsner's book, and then Chopin had years of training with Elsner. So I wasn't there. So unfortunately, it's hard to really have the 100% security that they did that. But I'm very sure.
Now Chopin and Partimento. What about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the Kopinski's treatise, it's also available online. And Kopinski was a famous conductor and composer of the time, friend of the family, of the Chopin family. And he published this treatise where you also have the rule of the octave in it, and it's all in Polish. I sometimes use the material for my students. When I talk about romantic thoroughbass, I use the exercises by Förster that are published in Kopinski's method, and you can literally see in Chopin's pieces that he applies this kind of harmonic concept in his music. It fits completely when you analyze the music. And so I think the evidence is in the music, and we have enough evidence to say, well, yes, they did teach the rule of the octave. They did teach the Marche d'harmonie. And I mean, Chopin's family, and that is really important to keep in mind. Chopin's father was the head of a very important school in Warsaw, and they were, frequented by the most important and the bourgeois, the high class, the intellectual elite of the city, in the salon of the Chopin family. So he was pretty, what you would call today, he was very privileged, as so many others like Mendelssohn also, very, very privileged people. And that's something that I think it's very important to keep in mind, that they were, they had a very good training, a very, very thorough training. So yeah, there's a lot to find there. And I think what's important is that Chopin thought that it was important for the professional pianists that he trained to take theory lessons, and so he sent them to his very good friend Henri Reber, who was a teacher of composition and harmony at the Paris Conservatory at the time. And we have evidence that Thomas Tellefsen and that his best pupils, they had lessons with Reber.
And Reber, his theory of harmony, how is he like Cattell, and which is kind of along that lineage of the Neapolitan tradition?
Also, Reber also includes the famous basse donnée and chant donnée, and it's like it's an extension of the Partimento tradition basically, and also the chant donnée tradition is very important, harmonizing melodies, and I think that was really you can look that up in the Traité d'harmonie by Reber, who
their personal relationship, were they good friends?
Chopin and Reber were very good friends. Yeah. So Reber nowadays he's mostly remembered for arranging the funeral march at the, Chopin's funeral, but he was so much more. I mean, he was a very important teacher at the time. And actually so how I got hooked up and even how I found about Zimmermann was I read in these letters, one of the letters, his last will, Chopin's last will, he wanted Reber and Alkan to finish his piano method.
Chopin. Okay, so Chopin had a plan to create his own piano method and publish it.
Exactly.
And he had started it, but he never finished it, and he wanted his friends, the ones you just mentioned, to take up his work.
Exactly. So, and that, of course, you can imagine that for me as a pianist and music theorist, it kind of
holy grail.
I'm like, wait a minute, and I looked up, I researched like crazy. Like at that time I really didn't do anything else, and I researched and I couldn't find anything about it. I was like, why has no one ever researched this? And so I knew already that, of course, Alkan was one of the best pupils of Zimmermann, and I was like, man, this Alkan was trained thoroughly by Zimmermann in all these disciplines. Why would Chopin ask Reber? Why the hell would he ask a music theorist and composer to finish his piano method? It would only make sense if...
Wait, that's a very important point you make, and because now we kind of separate everybody, right? You're either a pianist, you're a composer, or a singer. Everyone is in their separate categories. But you just made a very important point. He asked a music theorist / composer to finish his piano method.
And so my guess is, and this is what my first huge article about Chopin and his method and his unfinished method, I reconstructed, I made an attempt to, an educated guess. I'm not saying this is what it would have been like, but I tried to make an educated guess by, evaluating what Chopin left behind, what did he finish and what could it have been? And it turns out all the stuff that Chopin left is also basically included in Zimmermann's encyclopedia. So it's not so different. There's not such a big difference between the stuff that Chopin left and the Zimmermann treatise.
Was it a project that he was really focused on doing? Or did he start it and then kind of leave it? Because was there a lot of competition on the marketplace at the time? So he was kind of thinking, maybe this is not like a pressing thing and I can just leave it for now or something.
It's a very good question. I think yes. To be honest, if he had wanted to, if that was his first priority, he would have finished it. I mean, it's such a strong character and such a strong personality. He would have finished it, but he just didn't get to finish it. I mean, I think he really wanted to. It was something that he felt was important, but he just didn't get to do it. Because then there were, other obligations and
he's a very musically opinionated person, right? So I mean, to just say, please finish my work. I mean, that's amazing for somebody so opinionated about music to allow his friends to take up the baton, so to speak.
Absolutely, and it's not just. I mean, he also asked, probably sensing or knowing that the other ones are also busy. He also asked his Thomas Tellefsen, right? So the two most famous pupils that we now, is one is Carl Mikuli, and the other one is Thomas Tellefsen, the Norwegian pianist. And unfortunately, Tellefsen didn't get much further with his, his version of Chopin's method, and really most unfortunate is that Alkan and Reber never started to, or at least I don't know about it, and I've really researched as much as I could to find stuff about it. So, but that was my point of departure. So I said, okay, now let's have a closer look. I mean, then Chopin being the direct neighbor of Zimmermann and knowing all about it, I think maybe it would have even been possible. I can imagine that Chopin saw like, man, there are so many other pedagogues publishing right now, and Kalkbrenner and all these great guys. By the way, Kalkbrenner Chopin wanted to study with Kalkbrenner. And Kalkbrenner was one of the really, really important personalities at the time. And
He
there
gets
was a
a
lot
bad
of
name in history, right? I mean, I looked at his Wikipedia page.
yeah,
People are goofing on him. They're
yeah,
saying he's like, they have all these. They say he's like kind of an arrogant person, and he's old fashioned, and they have all these
yeah,
very
yeah,
negative
yeah.
portrayals on the guy. Could you give a more a fair assessment of Kalkbrenner?
So I don't know if I want to get into the personality, Kalkbrenner, like, how he was, because there are like, even in letters of Liszt, and you can read, like, they were making fun of him. He was probably a little weird as a personal character. I don't know. But, his vanity was apparently, he was famous for his being incredible, pianist, but also his vanity was very problematic apparently. But as a pedagogue, I mean, if you look at his legacy, also like is one of the most prominent successor. Like his successor, probably you could say, is Camille Stamaty, who was the teacher of the young the young Camille Saint-Saëns, and also of Gottschalk, and they taught also, and this is really important. It was always a combination of the education of being taught by a composer and a pianist. So Camille Stamaty was a composer and pianist, but Gottschalk was also trained by Pierre Maldin, and the same combination of teachers that trained Camille Saint-Saëns. So I thought, like, okay, that was the model. That was really the model of the time. And Kalkbrenner, he was also trained as a pianist and composer, and he was in the same class as Zimmermann.
They were peers.
They were peers, and Zimmermann came out first in the concours. He got a first prize, and he came out. And you imagine this, like I would, if when people ask me, like, if you want to time travel, where you want to go, I want to say, like, man, I want to go back to those days when Zimmermann and Kalkbrenner are in the same classroom.
Yeah.
And with Cherubini and playing their thoroughbass exercises, etc., and becoming the golden teacher generation. I would really call that the golden generation of teachers, because they've been so, it's been so unfair. Like, I had a project once where I said, like, we should do not a Hall of Fame of, but of music history, losers of music history. It could be the pedagogues of that time, Czerny, and because people mock them because of the, supposedly inferior quality of their compositions, but people don't really look at the composition. I mean, if you look at
how can they tell they're inferior? They're not.
Yeah. Look at Kalkbrenner's piano concerto. Look at Czerny's, some of Czerny's chamber music. It's incredible. I mean, and Onslow and all these composers that of that time, it's incredible. Really good music, and the service they did. And Marmontel wrote about Zimmermann, Kalkbrenner, and there's a really nice passage in his book. What's the book? Marmontel. The famous pianists. So Marmontel's book, he's really praising the famous pedagogues of the time, because he says, they sacrificed their career, and they sacrificed their career for the greater good of music, for the advancement of the music, and they educate our best musicians, and they are really revered by the professional musicians. But the lay concert, the music, the dilettante, you would say, they forget about them because they're not on the concert stage, and they're not in the,
That's amazing. So, and then even in the 20th century, the concert stage, it gets so divorced from that pianist-composer culture. It just becomes pianism, which is just playing the piano, which is unbelievable. Now, I want to ask you, since you are an expert in counterpoint as well, when I didn't know anything several years ago, I took the first etude by Chopin, Opus 10 No. 1, and I started analyzing it. I started putting chord symbols like C. And I thought I was really smart. Now, if Chopin himself were to look at his own compositions, how would he analyze his music?
I mean, it's hard to say what exactly would he have, put on in the score as symbols or so. But I would say he would have probably, I mean, I'm making an educated guess for all the stuff that I've been researching, but I think he would have approached it in a thoroughbass That's you can put it. Have you seen this first Bach prelude in the reduction by Czerny? It's a very very nice example of how people probably thought in terms of harmonic reduction. Czerny puts in his school of composition, a practical school of composition. There is in half notes, he puts all the chords of the first prelude of the Well-Tempered Clavier. He puts it in there, and I think really Chopin, that's his approach. He wanted to create something like, his first etude is like the first prelude, the first Bach prelude in that sense, not just because it's the same key, but you could figure it. I've done that many times with students. You just put a figured bass under it, and it works perfectly fine. And it's, you can analyze the scale degrees, like in this kind of tradition of Emanuel Alois Förster, and which was known in Warsaw at the time. And I think that's how he would have gone about it. That's my educated guess. And so you could just figure the bass, and then also transpose it to any other key, and that's very very doable. And what's really important, and that's only very few pianists play like that. But if you actually bring out the suspensions in this etude, you'd have to really know which note to give a little more energy, because the suspensions, the preparation of the suspensions, like the 4/3 suspension, or the, what's the 7/6 suspensions, you really have to know, and you really have to do your fingerings according to these suspensions, because you need to give those suspensions an extra little hit, and then the resolution, and then you need some more time, and you need some more flexibility. But most of the recordings, of modern recordings, I have to say, they just fly over these. Yeah, absolutely, because they think, okay, I have to be faster than anyone else.
I got to win win the competition.
Exactly, and then you hear these old. There's some students of Carl Mikuli, so one of the Chopin students, and also if you look at Francis Planté, for example. Who was a Liszt
the
student.
90-year-old guy who recorded. That's awesome.
Yeah, fantastic. And he's side reading the Chopin etude. It was just wonderful. I love that. It's like a jazz approach.
There is a video clip of him like just looking at the score and side reading it. That's awesome.
Yeah, and there are even now reconstructions of Camille Saint-Saëns, video clips of him playing with the recordings and the video that they kind of edited, and it's amazing. It's really great. It's a window in time. But so if you look at it, these interpreters, they took their freedom and the liberty to give exactly these notes because they knew what was in the music. They knew the compositional details, and they were giving these notes the extra attention that they deserved. And that's something I really think you need to know. You can still play the music, and you can play it amazingly, but if you know which notes to give a little extra, touch, that's important, and that's the great. I think that's the great art for the pianist, is to be so well rounded and well educated that you could improvise that, like a jazz pianist and jazz composer, and this really for me that's the parallel.
Okay, that's a wonderful segue. I mean, the final segment of this interview, we're running out of time, but I'm a huge fan of Ragtime. I mean, I watched The Sting. I love Scott Joplin. I just really quickly, and I know you've done a little bit of research on this, who did Scott Joplin study, and Tom Turpin? Who did they study with? Do we have any evidence that they had a little bit of formal music education?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tom Turpin, I couldn't find out who exactly was Tom Turpin's teacher. There are some Ernst Bornemann. He in one of his articles says that Tom Turpin, the two Turpins, the Turpin brothers, they had German teachers, and that was very common in Missouri at the time, in the after Civil War. Late 19th century, and Scott Joplin had very likely he had German teachers. The first one was Julius Weiss, and the second one, I suspect he had private lessons, but it couldn't be absolutely confirmed. But there was a meeting he had with Alfred Ernst, one of the first conductors of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, and So what I did was like that's more like this research like that I'm doing for my PhD dissertation, which is about the influence of 19th century European music theory on early jazz. And Joplin possessed the Manual of Counterpoint by Yadason. So that was when I did my jazz, jazz.
How do we? So we know he had in his possession a textbook on counterpoint.
Rudy Blesch, he talks about that. Rudy Blesch, the great researcher and one of the first, researchers to start the Ragtime revival. Probably, he had access to Joplin's estate, and unfortunately, it was like it is in New York somewhere. It was stored somewhere and then it got lost. People probably moving threw it away. But that's also a guest of honor. Joplin's second opera is lost, and we still don't know if it got lost in the copyright office or what exactly happened. My friend and fellow researcher, the great researcher at Berlin, he researched about it really to great deal about it and wrote about it in his great book about Joplin, but about the training. So about the training, I couldn't find anything about the music theoretical training of the early, ragtime musicians. Really, it's something like more deeper than just to say, okay, yeah, he did a little bit of whatever music theory here and there. But so I got into that because via Gottschalk. So when I did my jazz masters in 2015 to 17 at NYU, I in jazz history, I was with the director Dave Schroeder, great guy. We were talking about, in class, we at the same time, literally the same time, we said like, do you know Gottschalk? Do you know anything about Gottschalk? And I was like, man, that's impossible that we would say this at the same time, because I was telling him about, and in class I was talking about, the education of the 19th century pianist-composers, and also Gottschalk's training, because at the time I had done a little bit of research about Gottschalk. So then we went on, and I read this article of Rudy Blesch. I think it's even included in the edition of all the piano works of Joplin. You can, there's a little passage where it says like Joplin owned, he had this Yadason Manual of Counterpoint, and I was like, what the heck? Joplin had the Manual of Counterpoint. He possessed the Manual of Counterpoint by Yadason, and I knew, of course, my music theory studies, etc. I knew about Yadason and the Leipzig Conservatory, but I was like, how on earth did this treatise make it, to the Midwest? And why did and how did Joplin, how did it influence him? Maybe. I mean, I cannot say exactly how it influenced him, but I can only make educated guesses again. But if you look at his music, and when I was young, when I was 7-8 years old, I played ragtime. My piano teachers gave me ragtime, and it always felt so kind of, it didn't feel too
correct, right, in a way.
Yeah. And it also felt so classical, it felt as, to be syncopated. You could figure the bass again, and it's not just.
Well, we just had there was a clip by Wynton Marsalis recently talking about the influence of Beethoven on jazz with the syncopation. So that's really interesting. I have one more question on this: the Leipzig Conservatory. Now, that's not the Paris Conservatory in terms of that Neapolitan tradition, but are we talking about general bass in this situation?
Also, Also, Yadason also published a treatise on thoroughbass. Yadason was one of the most important teachers back then, and so for my doctorate degree, I did also research on the influence of publications and
you're like a homing missile for like unknown legendary pedagogues.
It's just I get from one topic to the next, and I'm just like, man, there's so much things that there are still not being.
And I did want to squeeze in this question about because I have noticed there's a lot of Roman numeral and function theory bashing. Yeah. So can you give me? And I'm not a scholar, so I would love an expert to tell me what's the nuance here. Is it? Can we be so bold and attack one theory? Is there like positives and negatives to both here, especially when thoroughbass and they're all in one country? So what's happening here? Can you give me a balanced perspective?
Yeah, so I wouldn't want to bash any of the theories because you if you look at it from a historical, as a historian, then those are all theories that were developed for some reason and by great musicians, and so it's always I'm trying to see the value in each. So, but about the difference between the functional theory, I mean Hugo Riemann and all his students, and there were a lot of students of Hugo Riemann's that went to the U.S. that emigrated. That went to Chicago, to St. Louis, to New York, and influenced the educational system there. The functional theory, that as I learned it in Germany, is a completely different one from the functional theory in the beginnings. That's pretty. There's a lot of research that has been published about this. But what's important for the ragtime musicians, I think, is that the Stufentheorie, the Roman numeral theory, where that came from, and very few people really talk about that, and I find that is important to know where it comes from. It goes back all the way to Italy and all the way to also the German, not just the Leipzig Conservatory. That was basically where it was maybe consolidated, you could say, and exported worldwide, because the Leipzig Conservatory, after the mid-19th century, the Leipzig Conservatory became really the epicenter. I mean, that was really one of the most important schools, and it became the model for the majority of the American conservatories. That's really important to keep that in mind, and also for the historically black colleges. That's another thing that's really, really important, and that's at the center of my research.
So wait, are they learning thoroughbass and Stufen theory at the same time?
Yeah, exactly. So that combination was very, very, that was, in very established in Leipzig. And so those musicians that were trained in Leipzig, and it's not just, Alfred Ernst. I started to see a pattern in the education of early jazz musicians. You can look at William C. Handy, at Will Marion Cook, James Rees Europe, Will Vodery, and they took theory lessons. And it's mind-blowing because a lot of them took theory lessons with former graduates of the Leipzig Conservatory. And I suppose that's why Joplin, and that's just also an educated guess, but he could have gotten this Jadason book by Alfred Ernst, because Alfred Ernst was a student of Jadason in Leipzig. And so apparently Rudy Blesch, he says that he writes that Joplin made a lot of marks in the treatise, and that he thoroughly studied it. It looked like very
a lot of annotations and stuff. Yeah.
Annotations, full of annotations, and you could see. So what I did in my article about it, and it's now, I think it's available online. I just saw it's available online. If you search for from Leipzig to St. Louis, that's the title. If you search for that article. About Ragtime and the Education, Einflüsse deutscher Musiktheorie, it's called, auf die Entstehung des Ragtime, Blues and Jazz. You can see that the treatises of Jadason, the harmony, the concept of harmony that Jadason is teaching, and you can detect a lot of those models that Jadason was teaching in operas like of the time, and also Joplin's opera Tremonisha, for instance. And also you could go and look at the structures in the ragtime repertoire of not just Joplin, but there are so many others where it fits perfectly. And I think we're underestimating, by saying they were self-taught. Again, it's like similar to Chopin. I don't think so. Honestly, I don't think they were self-taught. I think there was a very intense training.
Well, I mean, counterpoint takes years, right, to really be a part of you. You can't just look at it and then be an expert, right?
Right. And of course, it's a delicate topic. I mean, that's now we get into, of course, the whole question of race and how that was, how that was problematic at the time, but the historically black colleges, that's where, in my opinion, that's where the transfer happened. And you have to look at it from a historical standpoint, in my opinion, and then look which treatises were most received. And it's interesting because I looked at the Schirmer catalogs, for instance. I made an evaluation of all that, and it's going to come out in my PhD dissertation. So the most relevant, I would say, or the most sold books, which books sold most copies? That it's Schirmer publishes has published the catalog every year, and you can make an evaluation, and it's very interesting because the Jadason and also the Richter Harmony, Manual of Harmony, those were very, very important manuals, and you can see it up to this day. You can see in the American educational system, the way music theory is taught, it still relies so much on this kind of approach of Jadason and Richter. And it's been forgotten in all the Schenker debate and all that kind of stuff, that how much this kind of Stufentheorie, this Roman numeral theory, influenced the American educational system.
Okay, so the area of controversy for me is more of a music theory question, and you can really help me. Now, I understand the Paris Conservatory. I understand the Neapolitan thing. I understand you start with practical Partimento, you go to counterpoint, and then that goes to dispositions and all sorts of things. Now, I'm a bit confused with the German general bass tradition. Maybe you can help me here. So I know that you have general bass, which is figures.
Yeah.
But then we have Stufen theory and Roman numerals. But then after that, there's also counterpoint. So both traditions have counterpoint. But what is this Stufen theory stuff and what is all this Roman numeral stuff? I don't understand because if you both have counterpoint, what's the need for the Stufen theory?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I really think it's more like what was important to the theorists at the time was, well, we have thoroughbass on the one hand, and it's very practical. Everybody had to learn that to become a practical, composer, to harmonize a given bass or a given melody. And also Ferdinand Hiller, who I mentioned before, he published also a German harmony treatise and counterpoint treatise, Studien des Kontrapunktes, where you have basically just given basses and melodies, like in the Paris Conservatory tradition. And so that kind of approach also at the Leipzig Conservatory was taken. So the Roman numerals, what do they add to the equation is you could invert any given structure and expand, and the harmony in the late 19th century, you can see it in Wagner, but also in other composers' music. It's like they try to push the boundaries and the envelope so much that you would just, go about it in a mathematical way sometimes to say this is, a combinatorial space.
Is Wagner a general bass guy? Because didn't he study that Italian kind of thing? So is he, are you saying so that Wagner as well is kind of has a bit of influence in the German theories?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Wagner's teacher, Theodor Weinlig, long time ago, when I was researching, I basically systematically looked at every composer's major name education. And Wagner, so I ordered the treatises of Wagner's teacher, Theodor Weinlig, who was trained in the Italian tradition of thoroughbass and, as a Kapellmeister. And you can see that it's more, the way Wagner and also Verdi, how they went about their, advertising themselves as being self-taught and the self-taught genius. That's a lie. That's just a plain lie. It was a trick to advertise, and Berlioz did the same. Verdi said he never studied, in a conservatory. Well, he had private lessons with the director of the conservatory. So why would he, that's a trick. It's a marketing, way of marketing themselves. That we know, but Wagner, you can even go and look at the music, and you can put, a great deal of the music is still, it's possible to put, to look at it from a perspective of thoroughbass, but also, and that's important, what I meant with the combinatorial space. If you invert all the harmony, and even in Chopin, I would also go so far to say, well, yeah, of course, the Neapolitan sixth chord, for instance. The inversion of it and the root position, Neapolitan sixth on the flat scale, second scale degree, that is, of course, I mean, they thought in different ways and looked at it from different perspectives. But so the Roman numerals, they really give you that. They help to classify and to say, well, this is the family of the fifth, like of the Roman numeral 5, scale degree 5, and we can invert this chord and we can add the dominant seventh and the nine and the flat nine, etc. And jazz harmony. I mean, you look at the early jazz harmony, and you can still apply that. And what's very interesting at that one of the most, John Mahigan, in his first book, which became...
He had the chord invertibility, right?
Yeah, and he even says, why don't we use thoroughbass and figured bass to, describe chords? And he says, well, it's all there, but and he then realizes, well, this is a music that now with recording technology, etc., and most people go about it like, by training, listening to the record and playing by ear. But I would say that the musicians, and Duke Ellington is part of that, and all, Scott Joplin, they learned music theory and they had a heavy training.
Okay, but now I'm confused, Philip, because now I understand the counterpoint and figured bass, but I don't understand the Roman numerals and the Stufen theory. But I do know that they existed, and they definitely did influence. And I know people thought of chords for sure, invertibility of chords. But how does that jive with counterpoint? Because it seems like they are in some ways, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but it seems like there are two traditions, in two separate traditions. One is thinking of invertibility of chords, but some are thinking of purely counterpoint. Yeah.
Well, the problem that comes with the Roman numerals is, and I now, teaching at the University of Lucerne in Switzerland, I'm teaching Roman numerals and thoroughbass at the same time, and I really I know very well what I'm speaking about. It's like it's very hard to include the contrapuntal phenomenons that are included in thoroughbass, and that syncopation and all the stuff that you explain. You kind of have to make it a separate theory. When you're teaching Roman numerals and the invertibility, you kind of have to separate the two. So that's why counterpoint also became a discipline in itself, in my opinion, and also why there are different treatises for the matter, because a treatise of counterpoint, and then mostly you also have a treatise on fugues. So Yarason also, it's you have the manual on counterpoint, but then also there's a separate book on fugues, etc. So there you can see that the way thoroughbass was taught in the early days, that the interval of the outer voices, how that affected the, in the tradition of Heinichen and also the Italian tradition, that was not so much in the conscience of the musicians I think, even in Leipzig in the late 19th century, because you still have the practical exercises, but I'm not so sure. I mean, looking at the treatises, I just don't read about it. So I'm assuming that either they said it in the classroom, they were talking about it, or it was omitted for the sake of the Stufen theory and to give that an emphasis, and then you would go to the counterpoint class, and you would start then to know, okay, well, this is the chord, but this is how I have to treat the chord and to lead the voices. So it's mostly voice leading, and the separation, in my opinion, the separation is a problematic one, because if you learn it in the Neapolitan tradition, and if you learn that voice leading and harmony are just two coins of the same metal, and you don't learn it as two separate disciplines, that is really helpful, I think. And that's the great, the great achievement of the historische Satzlehre and the historical, performance practice and Satzlehre, which, I didn't know about. And I was taught by Johannes Menke and also Ludwig Holtmeier to take a different perspective and to look at it from a more horizontal point and a thoroughbass perspective. But I'm not so sure if that was in the Leipzig Conservatory tradition. I think people really did a lot of work in the thoroughbass field still, but I'm not so sure in how far the counterpoint was also taught in the thoroughbass lessons. That I really cannot say yet, but I think it was really separated.
God, I hate to leave you go. I could sit you here and ask you questions for the rest of today, but I know you're a busy man, and it's been such a pleasure talking to you today.
It's been a pleasure.
To end off, can you just let my listeners know what you have in store for the rest of the year and also next year?
Yeah. So So an article of mine will come out soon online about the history of the lead sheets. That's one of my favorite topics at the moment. Where do lead sheets come from? And so that's going to come out soon, like probably before the end of the year. And then I'm trying to get back to, because I started a new job and trying to get back into my doctoral research about the education of early jazz musicians and ragtime musicians and early jazz musicians. It includes James P. Johnson's education. It includes Duke's education, but also, many others that are forgotten nowadays. And then, fortunately, we just finished the book about the applied piano, and of course it's a little provocative, the title, the universal instrument, because the piano, of course, is not the universal instrument anymore, but it had been for a long time, and I think still for education it's important. But that just came out, and I think it should be published also online by the end of next year probably. But anyone who's interested in in it should just drop me an email or write to me and ask about it. I'm happy to answer questions, etc. So that is mostly what I'm concentrating on now. The research about the early jazz and and Zimmermann. For now, I just use that material in my teaching, and I'm trying to finish this new edition. But I hope I can get those things finished soon. But it would be a translation to German and English, because it's only, and that was partly what probably made it disappear, because it was only published in French, the encyclopédie, and then that was not perceived anywhere outside of France, I think, and that's what I'm working on right now. So hopefully finishing it soon. Yeah.
Wonderful, Philipp. Thank you for being on the Nikhil Hogan Show.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Take care now. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.